everybody. Thank you so much for joining my session today. It's the last session. I'm going to really try to make it as exciting and entertaining as possible, but it may get a little bit boring at times, and then I'll kick it out to make sure it's entertaining again. So I will look at your faces and see whether or not you're looking at your phones or your computers, and if you are, then I'll make the decision to become funnier, provide more entertainment, and so on. So I will be looking at you all to guide me in that. So my name is Bethany Brown, and I am a knowledge manager. I work in international development, which is a great place to be for making change in the world. I work for a company called Resonance Global. And what Resonance does is that it helps its clients solve economic, social, and environmental challenges. That's kind of a big thing, right? So how do they do that? My company really focuses on partnerships. We all know that not one organization, not one company, not one government is going to be able to solve the challenges involving climate change, conflict, all of these big challenges that we're facing. So why not get together, find shared value, and work on combating these issues collectively and with coordination. So that's what my company does. We do partnerships. An example of this is, recently we engaged PepsiCo and the United States Agency for International Development into a partnership where they are empowering women along supply chains within PepsiCo focus areas. So this is really cool work that we're doing, but of course, from a knowledge management perspective, it's really complex because we have projects all over the world in many different countries, 65 different countries to be specific. And then we also do a lot of different things. We work in natural resource management, we work in economic growth, we work in conflict, we do all of these sorts of things. So being able to synthesize information from across our organization is kind of hard, which is why I'm here talking to you today about transforming knowledge flows. So at the crux of this presentation, I think, what I wrote here is what you did is as important as what you will do because it relates to the resonance journey. Oops. Let me see. We might have some tech issues. Hold on. Oh, it's just fidgety. It's honestly, my computer gets tired as the day progresses, and I don't know why that is. It might be specific to my own computer. So what you did is as important as what you will do. And I'm just saying to this to you as I get into my story that I'll be presenting on the next slide. Yes, and I did attend the storytelling session earlier today, which really raised the stakes. So I'm hoping that this story goes over well. So I joined my company about 6 years ago, and at that time there were 25 people within my organization, and the people are the blue dots here. And then the knowledge products are the yellow stars, and the knowledge flows are the red lines. We were super lucky because something that our HR department did was just hire very social people and that were very open to having conversations and talking to each other. So there's this one person in particular. His name is Brett. He was just so personable and welcoming, but then also he was an expert and he had a wealth of experience and he just seemed to know everything. So many people would go to Brett and they would ask him, I'm working on a proposal and I need to know what our qualifications are in Uganda. Can you tell me? And Brett would sit there And he would say, yeah, we did an agriculture partner assessment in Uganda, and here's the final report. Which was great in some ways because, as Dave Snowden said earlier, relationship building is so important. And at this ad hoc stage in our development, where I call it the Brett years, where everybody's just talking to each other, it really worked to build relationships and culture within our company, which was awesome. But on the other hand, we were only getting the Brett perspective, and we weren't also providing folks with sort of a comprehensive, explicit knowledge story of what happened during that agriculture assessment that happened in Uganda. Also, it wasn't consistent. Brett told a different story than what Carrie told on the other side of the company. So we were in this very ad hoc stage in our development, which was fine because we were 25 people, right? But fast forward 2 years, we started to win contracts. We became larger, and our teams expanded. So we weren't just one-person teams anymore. We were actually 3 to 5 person teams that found challenges, knowledge challenges, and developed their own knowledge products to fill those knowledge gaps. So, for example, the operations department created a list of their contracts, which was great for them because it met their needs. They needed to know when to report via their contract requirements. They needed to know start dates and end dates, when to do their closeouts, and so on. So that information served them, but it didn't serve the person that needed to know our past experience in Uganda, right? They would look over at the spreadsheet that operations created and wouldn't get an answer to their question. Something really interesting happened during this time too. And I don't know if you all have this with your knowledge management programs, but it was like a specific moment in time where it became evident to our company that we needed a knowledge management program to grow. And this was when, we were winning new business, but we're also expanding. And the owner of our company was like, maybe there's other services that we can offer. Why don't we offer a membership service where we can have companies, we can have government, we can have nonprofit, we can have foundations become members, and we can provide them with partnership insights. We can also maybe do a little matchmaking along the way. And so this was a great idea, but we needed to test it out, kick the tires a little bit. So we hired an external firm to do a feasibility analysis to better understand whether or not this new membership service was even feasible. So they conducted their study, and they came back to us. And do you know what they said? They said, every team that we meet with has a different way of explaining what they do. Also, each team has a different way of explaining what they've done in the past. So in order to develop this membership service, you're going to need consistency in what you're offering. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to offer a full, complete package. You're going to need to know what your approach is to partnerships across teams, what you've done across teams, in order to really create a value proposition for those members. You need a knowledge management program. So the company really took this to heart, and the owner took this to heart, and the owner actually created a knowledge management program and said, this is going to be our objective for 2020. Bethany, we feel like this is in your skill set. Would you like to create a knowledge management program for the company? And I said, yes, I'll do that. But I didn't do it alone. And I will say, if anybody is going to be creating a knowledge management program from scratch and has no idea what they're doing, which is myself and probably some other people in this room, I definitely hire advocating for a mentor. We hired a consultant, Lori Reed. Maybe some of you know her in this group. She met with me on a weekly basis to make sure I was staying on the rails, which is definitely needed. So that was a great experience. So fast forward to now, we have at the like crux of our knowledge management program are a series of libraries and databases. Well, actually, I should say libraries, databases. I use the words interchangeably because databases are boring, but libraries are cooler. At least I think. Because I've heard it in multiple sessions, like, oh, databases, nobody uses data. But it's so important to use databases to establish that foundational knowledge. So I make it a little sexier by saying libraries. So we established these libraries, and now everybody is singing from the same sheet. We are winning proposals. You may ask, like, oh, did you ever go after that membership model? And the answer is no. We actually didn't, because we have too much work to keep up with, which is a wonderful problem to have. And I must say, I am pretty sure much of that is due to our ability to synthesize knowledge through these databases that I'll be presenting to you today. One thing that I do want to mention, and Dave Snowden did a good job this morning articulating this, is that, like, this is only a piece of the puzzle, these knowledge tools, right? Like, I feel like one lesson that I've learned is that being hyper-focused on developing these libraries, I sort of lost touch with the human aspect in needing to push the information out via ways that actually, like, engage staff so that they learn from them. And he said, the technology is, I think, 5% of the solution. And I really, really believe that. Like, it takes a lot. I think in the Shell presentation today, they're saying, like, you have a database, but then you need to push that information out, right? That's really important. And I think as your technology becomes more sophisticated, that's even more important. Yeah, and one thing also to mention before we move along, I think libraries and databases, like, they're wonderful tools, but there's so many other tools out there that you can use. I mean, process guides, frequently asked question databases, expert catalogs, checklists, whatever it may be, to meet your need or fill that knowledge gap is going to be really important. It's just that today I'm just diving into libraries. Okay. So I'm really curious, like, who in the room works for an organization that uses primarily, like, Google? Can you raise your hand? Oh, 1, 2, wow, 3. Okay. All right, raise your hand if you work for an organization that primarily uses, like, Microsoft products. Oh, that's great. Wow. Excellent insight. And then everybody else, if you don't use Google or Microsoft, raise your hand. Oh, 2. Wow, this is really interesting. Great. So today, if you're selling products in the atrium, close your ears, because these are no-cost, low-cost solutions to piloting your libraries, right? So this is a great way to utilize sort of free or nominal cost platforms to host your information. I'll be talking about Google Sheets, SharePoint Lists, and SmartSheets. So interestingly enough, so I was hired by the United States Agency for International Development, Bureau for Resilience and Food Security, that's a lot, to create a database for them, actually, because they were, like, trying to figure out a way to synthesize information on all of their partnerships so that they can better respond to requests for briefers, for information to include in communications, and so on. And they operate using Google. So as a SharePoint person, it's like, oh gosh, like Google is a hard new platform to learn, despite all the marketing to make you feel like it's going to be really easy. So I jumped in and created a Google sheet for them, which I'll share with you today as an option. SharePoint Lists. Seems like very many people in the audience are familiar with SharePoint Lists. And then SmartSheet. So I can go over sort of the full spectrum of possibilities for you all and how they can be used to build your knowledge base and ultimately transform your knowledge flows from something that might be ad hoc or team-based to a corporate flow of knowledge. Yes. Okay, so here with Google Sheets, like I said before, the agency really wanted to create a catalog of examples where they could pull, based on a full filter feature, examples to use in communications, that also lessons learned for future program design. They wanted to understand like contributions from each partner and things like that. So what I did was they had already identified this need, so it was really simple in that way. But the next step was interviewing folks, right? So like, Sally, what do you need from a database? What do you need to look up? And really, they said loud and clear, we need to know the story of our partnerships. We need to know the purpose of them, the impact, the lessons learned. So that's why this blue coded section really tells the story. And then there are other coded sections that speak to geography, and then also the context for the team. So there are teams within the teams, some that work on water, some that work on nutrition, others that work on resilience. So being able to filter examples by that was important. And then the ability to quickly see what it is, but then dig in deeper if needed. So here, there's a brief outline of, the impact, but then you can click on reference documents, which are actually housed in the back end, where you can pull up quickly more information if you're writing an article or just want to explore a little bit further, which I think is really great about Google Sheets. The one thing that I really despise about Google Sheets is that you can put multiple values in one cell, but the system doesn't recognize it. So you can put in, I think this applies to, for example, this entry with multiple countries because it's regional. You can put in Honduras, Peru, El Salvador, but the system doesn't recognize the unique values, so you can't filter by them. Unless, and so those are multiple values, obviously, in one cell. Alternatively, if you only need like one value per cell, then you can create a drop-down menu and have it filter easily, if that makes sense. Moving on, SharePoint Lists. Looks like everybody's pretty familiar with SharePoint Lists if you aren't already, because I actually wasn't when I started my knowledge management program. This is one of the things that the consultant introduced to me, actually. One of the things that I really love about this is that it does recognize unique values in the cell. So you can create metadata term sets based on your key informant interviews, and then use that to enter in your data, which is really nice. You can link to document libraries within the system. You can attach files directly, which is really nice. So you don't have to like click around, it's just right there. And then the cool thing about this, I think the coolest thing is that you can put profiles into each entry. So if somebody's like, yeah, I want to look up that Uganda assessment on agriculture, then you can find it in here. And then you can see that Brett worked on it, and then click on Brett's name and send him an email directly for a meeting so that you can get that tacit knowledge exchange, which is really nice. Yeah, I think the one downfall is that it's not super user-friendly. I've had many staff come up to me and be like, this database is so boring. It's like it was created in like 1995. Like, haven't you come along with the times? And that is true. Like, it is pretty boring. I find it fascinating because I'm a knowledge manager, but many people do not. So I think as a way to improve would be creating dashboards with Power BI, just creating better visualizations. And then next, SmartSheets. So I haven't actually used SmartSheets, but I wanted to show it today because I think that it represents a unique opportunity for folks to create databases that are a little bit more modern outside of both Microsoft and then as well as outside of Google too. These have very similar functionalities where you can insert profiles. There's automatic dashboards, so you don't have to program anything in Power BI, which is so nice. And you can just switch the view to like a Gantt chart or matrix or whatever you want, which is really nice. So I just wanted to share this because it is a nice alternative. And there are others like Airtable, for example, that are nice. So this is how I created my library. And this is getting a little bit more sort of like into the process. But the first thing that I did, I guess, first thing that most knowledge managers do when they're creating a knowledge management program is conduct a needs assessment, right? That's like knowledge management 101. But one of the things that I asked in that needs assessment is, what type of information do you need to do your job better? And I analyzed those results and found that many staff needed to know what we've done related to projects. They also wanted to see the deliverables that were produced by other teams so they don't have to, reinvent the wheel every time. They could just replicate and reuse past work. And then they also wanted to see what our work in partnerships was. That's like our claim to fame. That's our bread and butter. Like, what have we done? And so that was sort of the impetus behind these topic areas that I established through the needs assessment. So I think when the needs assessment, it's really easy to be like, okay, identify your knowledge gaps and then figure out what the solution is going to be to fill that knowledge gap. Maybe it's a library in which you can proceed, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's a training, right? Maybe they just want to know partnering approaches. So you can create a training to meet that need. And I'll talk a little bit at the end about the hammer theory, which I think is relevant here. But moving along, once you know that you need a library and you've determined your topics, then you can start talking to your users, right? You have interview questions and you want to know, like, how are they going to use this? And what type of information are they looking for? And that's what you can use to establish your fields. And then you want to know the taxonomies that they're interested in, including in the library. And you can like form your metadata to meet those needs. And then this is really important. I feel like some people like squirrel away their information in different places, either like they publish it online in various places or it's like in the internet various places. So asking them where their information lives as you're building this library is super important because they probably like have squirreled things away in areas that you don't even know. We've had drop boxes created. We've had like all these various technologies created sort of ad hoc. So it's nice to ask that question. And then always ask them to participate in a pilot and like review the spreadsheet that you put together. Solutioning, I think just like laying out the possible solutions, whether or not it's the list, the Google, the SmartSheets, and evaluating whether or not they meet your needs. And then building it out, the development is tedious and like, it can be kind of boring, not gonna lie. So the best way that I found to do this is by hiring an intern. Sorry, because it's mutually beneficial. I will say I can make an argument for this. By putting information into the database, they definitely get a better picture of what the organization does, which is sometimes what they're looking for from their internship, right? But then you have somebody kind of fulfilling this job that can take literally months, if not several months, if not years. So that's really nice. And then launch. Yeah, launching the database can be really fun. Launching the libraries, I think, doing it in an all-hands meeting, road shows where you specifically state why the library is important to each team is really important. Yeah, and then complementary products like a one-pager that describes the fields and the definition of each field, and the taxonomy that you're using is really important as well. All right, I'm going to go on to maintaining the library. This is really critical and honestly one of the hardest things to do. And if you don't have like a designated person overseeing this, it's extra hard to do. So I guess my one tip is to have somebody responsible for managing and maintaining libraries. In my company, that's me. There's a lot of chasing down. It's not like the most glamorous job, to tell you the truth, but it works. So one thing that you can do for entering and updating these libraries is to make sure that staff have like a KM responsibility within their OKRs or even their job descriptions that speaks to updating company systems. This is kind of fun. I do smash up sessions where twice a year I have managers sit virtually together and we smash up our keyboards, updating entries or entering entries. And it's just a fun community building time with each other. Again, designate an owner, so that's typically a knowledge manager, maybe somebody else. And then embed into existing processes. So for me, in my knowledge management program, we have KM startup checklist and KM closeout checklist. So every time we win a new contract, I meet with a team and I have them go through a checklist to make sure everything is set up appropriately for my program. And within that checklist is entering all their information from their contract into the project library. And at closeout, it's making sure all their entries across the product, the project, and the partnerships libraries are up to date. Trainings. Here it's really important to have an on-demand training available for staff if they're interested in like going back and relearning. And then also meeting with new staff during orientation to go through the information and walk them through like how to use the libraries and answer any questions they might have. Thankfully, I found actually in my orientation, and like I think that this session really speaks to it, is that with SharePoint, so many people have used SharePoint at other companies that they're really familiar with SharePoint lists. So when they come, they feel really comfortable diving in. So sometimes in my orientations, people have already used SharePoint and they're like already using the libraries, which is cool because it's such a common application. And then refreshers, if you're noticing like teams aren't using the libraries as often, or there's some confusion within teams about how to use it or the value behind it or how to enter data, then go to them and have a refresher to get them up to speed. And then blast. I think this speaks to the shell session this morning where it was really communicated that, a database, nobody really uses a database. And to some degree, I think that can be true depending on the organization. But to bring it to the next level is to like push that information out, right? So ways to do this, email blast. So in the past, I've taken all the new entries from the smash up sessions and actually synthesized them in an email and then sent them out to the whole company so that they can see a comprehensive view of what everybody's been doing, which is kind of cool. Write stories for newsletters, for the company newsletter, also communicate to appropriate audiences via Teams. And this is actually really neat, something that just happened. We have communities of practice. And one of them is centered around partnerships, and they use Microsoft Teams to communicate, and they have channels. One of these channels is like Ask Me Anything. And it's been gaining a lot of like momentum recently, and folks will say, do you have a good example of a project that we've done in Indonesia where we did a partnership assessment that lists out all of the people that we interviewed? And some people will respond and they'll kind of give their own Brett perspectives, right? But then I'm able to filter my list in SharePoint by Indonesia, by assessment, and then give them a full comprehensive view of actually what we did in Indonesia, which is nice. Yeah. And so I want to leave by saying this is like one of my favorite things to just focus on when I'm doing knowledge management, because I feel really oddly passionate about libraries and databases. And it's easy to feel like they're the solution to everything. But I think one of my lessons that I've learned as a knowledge manager that is exactly what Dave Snowden said today, that it's only like a fraction of what people need to learn. Really, it's like 5%, right? So it's that other 95% that also needs a lot of focus in terms of giving people what they need when they need it, like how they need it. So yeah, not all nail, like if you're a hammer, not everything is, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Yeah. So when you're a knowledge manager, everything looks like a database to me. Yeah, so that is my presentation today. Again, thank you so much for joining. I know this is the last session. Hopefully it was intriguing. Yeah, open. Oh, yes. Thank you. Oh, yeah. How big is my company now? We are 120, and we're hiring for, I believe, like 30 positions right now. So we'll be soon 150. So yeah, a lot more. We've contemplated a people library, but then I'm like, not every solution is a database. So I'm kind of stepping back. But yeah, yes. Any more? I saw a hand over there. Yeah. Yeah, so how do you separate the libraries? So we initially created a project library because we knew that that was sort of the biggest knowledge gap that we had. And then from there, the next year, every year we conduct a survey, a knowledge management survey. And so we realized after that there's also a need for a product library, as well as the partnerships library. So it kind of happened according to priority. And in terms of how they're separated, like in SharePoint, we just created different lists. Although there are ways to link via, like our products are obviously associated with our projects. So ways to link them up to make sort of that communication between the two. And then the Google Sheets library, that was just standalone because it had one sort of topical area. Yeah. Did that answer your question? Okay, perfect. Yeah.
I'm curious about like the checklists and all of the different workflows that you all have. Do you ever get like pushback or rolls of the eyes or feeling like, oh, this is just like another thing we have to do, or like it feels very compliancy? And if so, how do you like
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you. That's a really good question, which is like we do have we have orientation, we have contract start up, and we have contract close out, a checklist for KM. And it's really interesting. I found the folks, so our company is broken up into two sort of divisions, one that serves government clients that has more red tape associated with their projects, and then one that serves corporates that does not have any red tape. And we have found that the government folks, managers, they love the checklist. They're like, give me the checklist. I need to know what I need to do. But on the corporate end, they're like the wild, wild west. They don't really care. They're like, checklist? Are you kidding me? Like, I'm not like, we get so many eye rolls, but it's not only for the knowledge management checklist, it's also like other sort of compliancy things, which makes sense because they're innovators, they're fast and they're furious and they're just like ready to get to the work, right? And ways to mitigate that, I at one point in time, I did do an incentive to participate in the Smash Up. So I had the company provide like, I think it was like $500 worth of donations to Kiva, which is an online like investment portal where you can invest in individuals in developing countries. And it just keeps on growing, growing, growing. And that was a really cool incentive for the project. But it took a lot of influencing the company to give me the money. But after, they were like, why do we have to, you know, incentivize people to do their work? So that's another thing. But yeah, the eye roll is like, I feel like that's the non-glamorous side of definitely my KM program, and I'm sure other KM programs have like better ways of doing this. But there are times where I'm like literally just also like messaging people like a lot, like annoyingly to get things updated. But they understand in the long run that it's part of their jobs. So, yes, go ahead.
There are so many different types of information. So how do you decide what goes into your library? What's the format?
Yeah.
How do you decide?
Yeah. So the question was, there are so many different types of information. How do you decide like what goes into the library itself? So we build our libraries centered around topics. So it's like the topic is partnerships, projects, or product, or even for USAID, it was partnerships. And the way that we distinguish between like the types of information, we actually created like metadata that breaks out whether or not, it's a training or an assessment or a report or, what type of piece of information it is. And you could filter by that in our product library. I think another way of like I love the idea of using databases to catalog lessons learned, like in the shell example this morning. I want to explore like what that actually looks like, right? Because again, it's like a totally different, it's like tacit knowledge. Like how do you do that? So yeah, does that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
So, ma'am, did you eventually go with the SharePoint and the Google as your solution?
Yeah, for the company, so I mean, I was like pretty scrappy. I think a lot of us need to be scrappy at first, right, to prove concepts. And so we already had Microsoft. So, I mean, and like convincing IT to go with a different program. And then also we're housing a lot of sensitive information too. So we knew that there's like a firewall around SharePoint, and it's free, and it kind of does the job pretty well, according to me, maybe not other people in the company. So for my company, it was SharePoint. For government, it was Google, because that's their operating structure. And again, sensitive information needs to be stored behind their firewall. I have seen teams within my company use Airtable, SmartSheets, without permission. They just do it, which is like whatever. Not okay, but it happens, right? We know it happens. So it meets their needs. And that's the wild, wild west part of my company, just let you know. Yeah.
So how big is CAM? How many other knowledge managers are in your company?
I'm the only knowledge manager. Yep. Yeah. But we might be hiring another one because I'm switching over to more client services now. A lot of people need knowledge managers, which is a great thing for us. Yeah.
I'm also the only person.
Yeah.
Did you like find like having kind of like committee or like part-time people or people who like were able to maybe parts of their time to do some of this work? Like how did that?
Yeah, when I was developing the knowledge management program, I did establish, again, at the recommendation of my mentor, a knowledge management governance group that represented, all levels within the company and then all different departments. And then what I did was I met with them on a monthly basis to share out what I had done and then what I expected to do and to get feedback on the different parts of the KEM program that I was establishing. So yeah, libraries were one component. I also established communities of practice, a residence university. And then, so there are different components that I got feedback on in that way. And it was really nice because they were like personable people that told me how it was, like in a very straightforward way, which I definitely appreciated and I needed too. And they would actually, communicate things back to their teams as well. So that was really important. Yeah.
So when you were the checklist, who developed the checklist? Was that you? Or
Yeah. Yeah. I was a checklist developer. Yeah. I love checklists and databases. I should create a t-shirt. Libraries, I should say. All right. Yeah. Yeah, so what I do on SharePoint is I actually create like multiple versions of the same checklist, and then I just change the title to the project. And then I share out a link and say, complete this checklist. If you have any questions, then we can meet in person and go over it. So they're filling out the form live. Like they can just open the link and then fill out the checklist for their specific project. And I'll have it on file. And I don't have to like attach anything. Does that make sense? Nope, it's actually within a document library. The checklist that I create for the knowledge management startup checklist, if that's what you're referring to, which is basically like when a contract is awarded, I will send the management team a checklist, and on that checklist is a list of items for them to complete. One is like setting up their document library to make sure that it's in accordance with knowledge management protocol. Another is like making sure that they're entering their project or contract into the project library. So it's like all the KM things that they need to do. So that's a Word, Word document that I host in SharePoint that I send them the link to, if that makes sense. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thanks. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.